Hello and good afternoon to today's webinar, Extend the Value of Your SAP with Vertex Add-on. My name is Sabine Leitner and I will facilitate today's session. If you want to ask some questions during the webinar, please feel free to do so. You very easily can do that on the Q&A tool on the bottom right of the screen, and then we either will address them during the presentation or at least at the end of our webinar if the time permits it. So I'm very happy to welcome our two presenters of today's webinar, Angelo Torres and Roger Lindelauf. Over to you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sabine. Thank you all for taking your time today, your valuable time today, to actually sit here today with an hour with us to talk about SAP and Vertex. My name is Angelo Torres. I'm a vice president at DMA and lead the VAT operations. For the few that might not have known DMA yet, we offer VAT advisory, VAT compliance, and VAT technology services. And especially technology is what we're talking about today. It's how to look at the Vertex solutions that are available and whether they are valuable for your business. Roger, would you like to go next?
Thank you, Angelo. Welcome, everybody. My name is Roger Lindelauf. I'm the director for the Professional Service Organization and the SAP Center of Excellence for Europe for Vertex. My background is an SAP consultant for 37 years and in the VAT determination area now for around 20 years. And today we hope to give you some information about what kind of solutions we have, what the costs are for the solutions and how you are going to implement that. I think we are going to first start with the SAP S/4HANA. Everybody is now on a journey or is planning to go on a journey to go to S/4HANA. We know that they have a lot of new functionalities, but we're also going to talk about what is new for the VAT determination in the S/4HANA. If we look at the SAP S/4HANA, why are people choosing to move to S/4HANA? There are, of course, a lot of benefits. There's a lot of new technology in the S/4HANA. It's easier to update business models. You do a speedy period closing, simpler user interfaces, lower cost of ownership, faster analytic insights, etc., etc., etc. So there's a lot of benefits to go to S/4HANA. And I'm now also looking at Angelo. I've looked into the SAP S/4HANA latest versions, looked for the updates on the VAT determination solutions, and I didn't see too much. So maybe, Angelo, you can tell us a little bit about what is happening on the SAP landscape, what is new for VAT determination in the S/4HANA systems.
Yeah, thank you very much. In essence, and maybe you can I'll press a few more buttons to get them over here. If you think about all the type of transactions that are actually going through SAP, those are all the type of transactions that a company performs. And in the VAT landscape, those can be very complex transactions to determine the right tax treatment. Transactions like a triangulation, like reverse charge, transactions like a pickup, and the more I press buttons, the bigger the type of transactions you see on your screen. And that's something that I think majority of the attendees are aware of and are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, that your ERP needs to be able to deal with all these different type of transactions in a way that it performs the right calculation. Now, SAP S/4HANA, the new environment, hasn't made a lot of updates when it comes to what ECC was doing. And therefore, what clients are facing now is that the type of configuration they had before in ECC is pretty much the type of configuration they continue to have. There is, I guess, a small update that has taken place, which some of you in the call might be aware of, that SAP standard processes to book certain sales order, the cross-company type of booking transactions, that's still available, but at the same time, SAP is also putting in a new process in it's called Advanced Intercompany. That's a different way of booking transactions in SAP that could help different type of transactions, but it's still results in that SAP, whatever a company has right now in the system, will have to follow up to make sure it can also deal with that in S4. So, and we can talk to that a bit more in a second, but just I think that's the main message here, that companies need to just realize that there is not a major upgrade in S4 when it comes to VAT determination that they already had in ECC.
And that is only about the green boxes that you showed there. But I guess also if you look at that's the problem with animations. If you look at the whole flows, it was basically designed around 2 parties in the flow. But the minute you have 3 or 4 parties in the flow, then you really have to do something in the SAP system. I guess that is also something that you notice with a lot of clients, that they are really struggling to have 3, 4, 5 parties in the flow and still do a correct tax determination. Correct.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for that, there's a lot of customization that we'll go through in a second. And that's why, if that customization is right now in ECC, then companies can expect to keep that type of customization in S4. And because of that, I think that's where we have I guess as Vertex has developed different types of solutions that can deal with that. So the first solution we just talked about, that there is just native SAP. Companies can continue using this SAP and keep using the current ECC configuration and pretty much lift and shift that into S4 if they want to, with additional enhancements if required. But there are also other ways of dealing with that. And there is a way of looking at the SAP Add-ons, which I'll go through in a bit more in a second, but there is also a way of looking at tax engines. We have a lot of slides around what's an SAP add-on, how does it work, and what's a tax engine. So I won't go through it in a lot of detail right now. But please consider that, in essence, if you're an SAP shop and you use S4 for your transactions, that companies are actually looking at these 3 types of options.
Yeah, it's of course the native SAP. Everybody can build something in a native SAP. Yeah, that's of course we build something as an add-on in the SAP system, but also companies could build their own kind of add-on in the SAP system. And like you said, you could also lift and shift from the ECC to S4HANA, although there are a couple of new business processes, so you indeed would need to enhance your old solution to get to a new solution that also fits S4HANA. But if I look at what we build in native SAP, especially if it is in-house built, then we always see the same problem popping up with each and every company. Does everybody speak the same language? And then I'm not talking about does everybody speak English or German or French or whatsoever, but really the technical language that we need. Everybody has a different background, everybody has a different job, and everybody has a different language in their job, how to explain certain things. If you look at, for example, a VAT manager is a schooled professional in law. They normally talk in articles. They really can explain in legal terms what the VAT requirements would be, but they are explaining that to a functional consultant. And a functional consultant is not necessarily a lawyer from a background. So very often you see a loss in translation. So if a tax manager explains a certain article, then the SAP consultant probably will understand 70 or 80% of that article, and some nuances will be lost in the translation. That functional consultant then needs to translate that to the software developer and the SAP system and ABAP developer. That's normally an IT guy who has less experience very often. I don't want to discharge the ABAP developers, but very often they have less experience in the functional area. So there is also a loss in translation. Then something has been built, then we are going to explain that to the key user. And like you see, the VAT manager wanted to have a certain dog in the system, and the key user thinks, oh, that's nice, we get a nice cat in the system. So there's so much lost in the translation in the meanwhile that you will see that whatever the VAT manager has explained is not necessarily what we in the end get into the system. And what we then also see as a problem, that VAT manager cannot really look into the system and say, this is correctly configured. because very often there's ABAP coding that he already doesn't understand. You're using condition records and access sequences. That's maybe extended to maybe 10 access sequences with a lot of fields in the condition records. So also there, it's very difficult for a VT manager to understand that. So what we very often then see is that what we build in native SAP is based on known cases. So we know we sell from France via Netherlands to Germany, and there's a certain expected tax result, but we are not really checking the nuances in the legislation. Like, is that middle party maybe registered in the destination country? If they are registered there, maybe we can't do a triangulation, or we have to do something else, a domestic preferred charge. So that's very often not built. It is just built on that known case that was explained by the VT manager, and that is built into the native SAP system. And there we very often see that we have a problem and what is designed in the SAP system. And that is where we always say you basically need a translator between the VT manager and the key user, and that translator needs to be able to speak all those languages in between, so you get a real good solution in the SAP system. Like I said, you can still do this in native SAP, you can build this, but you need to have the right people on board to really build a future-proof solution. Because also now with e-invoicing and so on, you're sending the data directly to the tax authorities. You can't make any mistakes anymore. So if too much is lost in the translation, you will still make mistakes in the tax determination and then send incorrect e-invoices and so on to the tax authorities. So that's a little bit about the native SAP. I don't know if you want to add something, Anjo, but I think we talked in the past. You also see that very often with a lot of companies.
Yeah,
so,
and what I just wanted to add is exactly maybe what you're showing here, is that it's difficult. That translation just takes a lot of time, and maybe that's, I guess, not to steal your thunder or say, but that's what you want to go through here on the hidden cost. It's not something to underestimate.
Yeah, and that is really sometimes people don't know what really is behind the scenes, and that's why I've put this picture up, because very often people only see the tip of the iceberg as the cost for VAT determination in the SAP system, and most of it is just hidden in the whole projects that are running, because nobody really will specify what the real costs are for VAT determination. So if you see a business case calculation for an S4HANA project, for example, you get a whole calculation of what it will cost you to implement S4HANA in your system. But there you will see, for the SD module, we calculate so much to implement this. For the MM module, so much. For the finance module, so much. But there's no line normally that is stating that the VAT determination will also cost you money. That's just hidden in all those modules. And also, if you then go to for example, changes in your business processes, you're going to create a new company code and a new registration in a new country with a new plan and so on, then you will say a change request, or sometimes a small project, where they just will say, we are going to implement a new entity in the system, but nobody is then going to explain to you how much it will cost for VAT determination. And that's why I want to take some of the time today to talk you through what the real costs are for implementing VAT determination in the SAP system. And I'm not talking about the lift and shift from the ECC to the S4HANA system, because that will be less expensive. You already spent that money years ago, and you just need to check if that solution is still correct. But I'm going to talk about people that are doing a greenfield implementation in S4HANA. And suppose you have an EU entity, and that EU entity is registered in 5 to 10 countries. What are you then expected as a cost if you really would make that visible in your project? And I'm not going to do all the legislation, but I'm just going to highlight a couple of things in the SAP system. And the first part is always the legal partner for VAT purposes. And SAP consultants very often don't know what we are talking about, because they talk in language like a sold to, and a payer, and a bill to, and a ship to partner. But in legal terms, we are talking about who is now actually reporting this transaction for VAT purposes if you send an invoice to that. And that is called a legal partner for VT, really build that into the SAP system, then you will need to have a couple of people on board. You need to have the VT manager who is explaining who our legal partner for VT purposes in reality is. So he's looking at the contracts and to whom did we send that contract. He doesn't care about who is paying the invoice or to which address in India in a shared service center we sent that invoice to. No, he's looking at who did we sign the contract with. Maybe you need an external VT advisor to also give some advice there. You need an SAP consultant for the SD module, the finance module. You need an ABAP developer that will modify a little bit of the coding to make sure that always the correct legal partner for VT purposes is determined. You need a key user to test it in sales and finance. If I then say on average, each member will be involved on 10%, we have 20 days in a month. And the average hourly costs are 100 euros. Of course, an external VT advisor and an SAP consultant is very often far more expensive. But I keep the cost low so that we really get a realistic view on this. Then you see that we are going to spend around 20,000 euros just to implement who is our legal partner for VT purposes so that we can invoice, send the invoice to the correct VAT registration number of the correct partner and also do the tax determination based on that correct VAT registration number. That's one thing.
Yeah, and maybe to add, Roger, on the previous one, because I find that amount very reasonable and maybe even a little bit on the low side, because you're only looking at that from a legal partner perspective, but at the same time, you have then who is really the shipping party, who's really receiving the billing document, who is receiving the products. There are so many different partners to define in SAP, and depending on the VAT legislation, it has an impact on it.
Yeah.
And that's going to this whole exercise of really knowing for type of transactions, for consignments, for example, free of charge deliveries. It always depends on what the legislation says exactly, especially if you look outside of Europe. Start looking into Asia, their legislation is different when it comes to a legal partner compared to Europe. That this is takes a significant amount of time.
Yeah.
And even for clients that maybe have set something up already in the past, then it's just trying to understand, what did you set up? What was working in the past? Did you set it up correctly? Because do we want to use the right data? That's something not to underestimate.
Yeah, I've seen projects where they messed around a little bit with the sold to and the payer and so on. So master data was not set up correctly. Sometimes you have to correct that. That means that you need to set up new contracts and so on. So there could be a whole box of Pandora which you would open up there. But I keep it low because this is the minimum amount, I think, what you need to spend. But it could be way higher to really understand indeed in your business what this would mean if you were to correctly implement this. And don't underestimate this. I did so many system reviews, and in most of them I see that it is not correctly determined who is your legal partner for VAT, and the wrong VAT registration was printed on the invoice, the wrong VAT registration was used in the ECC list and so on, and then you get all kinds of problems again also with your tax authorities. Another topic, and almost everybody has to deal with this, is EU triangulation. And that's also something that you should not underestimate. I think if you really want to do this correctly, and I see that in many companies also where they try to design this, there's a lot of knowledge necessary to understand what is EU triangulation, and then also how to determine that in the SAP system. One of the real difficult points is if you're using native SAP, you don't know how many partners are in the flow. So that is already a challenge to identify, do we have 3 parties in the flow? How do we determine that in the SAP system so that we actually can start EU triangulation? There's also triangulation is not only in the sales side, but it's also on the purchasing side. If you're the middle party in a triangulation, you also need to correctly determine triangular deals. And I've seen too many times that they solve the sales side, but not the purchasing side. In the purchasing, they still do an intra-community acquisition instead of an EU triangulation input. So if you take everything into consideration, and I'm being really conservative here, then I think you spend easily 100,000 on a triangulation. But I know companies that have spent probably 200,000, 300,000, 400,000 and still don't get it right on the triangulation. But here also, I keep it low if this is really based on if you have consultants that really understand the triangulation and really have a good setup in the SAP system, then it will still cost you around 100,000 to just design the triangulation in the SAP system.
Yeah, and why it's so complex, especially in large enterprise companies that have 3 parties triangulations or 4 or 5 parties, is that they also change the bookings depending on where materials are available.
Yeah.
And if they're not available in one plant, then that booking needs to be changed to be made available in another plant. And that will then maybe change their standard way of processing a transaction that then initially SAP breaks. Because SAP natively was set up in one certain way, pretty much hard-coded, because that's SAP native configuration. It's a condition table which everything is hard-coded. And when you deviate from that process, which in large enterprise companies happens often because of business reasons, you break SAP, and that's also part of what we take into consideration when we start to design how a, let's call ABC or a 4-party transaction would look like. Like, what are the deviations that you go through as a company to make sure that you can actually do business? And why it takes so long to understand that is because then you have to talk to many other companies within other persons within the company, have many different design sessions to really understand what's taking place. And I think that's, Roger, where you're coming with 3-4 more times of the expense, because it ends up with how complex a company is just operating their business.
Yeah, and that's I've seen that too many times, and even see companies that say we don't use triangulation because it's too complex for SAP, so we are just going to register in every country so that we can do a domestic transaction in the end in the destination country, and that of course also will cost you a lot of money to maintain all those VAT registration numbers in all those countries. I could do all those different topics, but I took a couple of them. So the legal partner for VAT, we have our triangulation. I see that was missing here now. The extended revert charge, out of scope, VAT groups, cost of services, the total cost of if you have an invoice with a mixed goods and services. So how do you determine if it is a total goods or total services? That's a whole calculation that needs to take place in the SAP system. Really not simple. You see also, I estimate there 150,000 euros. That's even more expensive than triangulation. And then also the number ranges for invoices, for example. You need to have a sequential invoice number range without any gaps. That needs to be taken from a tax departure country. First, you need to then determine the correct tax departure country. So also there's quite some investment needed. If you then look at the total design, I think you're talking about 400,000 euros. If you really do that as one project and you really have people that understand the VAT laws, you could do it a little bit cheaper, maybe 300,000, but these are the amounts that are really what I always call the hidden cost in the SAP system for VAT determination, and that's quite substantial. So if you do an implementation of S/4HANA, then realize that in that budget for the whole implementation, there is already a cost for VAT determination, and that is what we also very often hear. Yeah, but if we take a third-party solution, then we get additional cost. It's very often not the additional cost, sometimes even cheaper to do it with a third-party solution than doing it in native SAP. Only people don't realize that it really costs money in native SAP. It doesn't come out of the box. We need to do something about it.
And what sometimes I'm missing, and maybe that would be part of my, I guess, main message to the audience today. And thank you again for joining. And if you have questions, please feel free to put them into the chat. But one of my main message here today is that what we see when companies are trying to decide, do I stay natively or not, based on everything what Roger just said, that they look at the license cost. But sometimes a good comparison is not made in the sense that also the implementation cost of native is taken into consideration. Instead of what they only do is say that I like one functionality more than the other, and only look at the license cost to make that determination and say native don't cost license, there is a cost. But sometimes companies don't take the additional step to then say, okay, if I go native and if I'm going to work with a third party to implement this native solution, what are my implementation costs?
Yeah.
And then you have a total view of, I go with native, these are my implementation costs. And then that's easier also to compare with, okay, if I don't go with native, I either decide to use a text engine, or if I decide to use an SAP add-on, what are my license and what is my implementation cost? And that's what I would strongly recommend to the team and the group here on the call today, is when you're going through this analysis, to please don't only look at it from a licensing perspective, but also look at both from a pure implementation perspective when you're actually making that decision. And then you can, of course, check the numbers that we're sharing here on the screen today, but you can also get numbers from your implementation partner and have a total picture of what is the expected cost.
Yeah, especially that last one. Really ask your system integrator, how much are you planning for VAT determination? If they come with a really low number, then you know they're only looking at certain elements of the VAT determination, but not really at this kind of tax determination. And then you need to really be critical with your system integrator to really get to the bottom. What are you going to plan? How many days are you planning to build all these kind of legislation into the system to get it right? And that's really a good advice, I would say, indeed, Angelo. What?
And Roger, if I sorry to interrupt you, I see we have a few questions in the chat.
Okay.
I'll read them out because I think they're questions to you, so you could answer them. The first question is, what are the countries that you cover?
So in Vertex, we cover 195 countries. So basically worldwide, every country that has a VAT regime or a sales and use tax or a GST, everything that has an indirect tax regime, we are covering with Vertex.
Yeah, and the second question that I see in the chat, I see also Budai's response. Second question is, does Vertex support integration facility of DRC in SAP S4 for sales and use tax? So if I have to read it again to make sure, or maybe you understand the question already, but I think the question is, if Vertex integrates with DRC, when DRC is going to be used for sales and use tax.
Yeah, what we normally we normally post everything in O series and then report from O series, our tax engine. We normally report out of the tax engine. I know that we fully support DRC because we also make sure that all the data is updated in the system for all those 195 countries. We make sure that all the VAT relevant data and tax relevant data is also updated in the SAP system. So you can also run any reporting solution, including the DRC solution from SAP. I think those were the questions in between. Let's continue. So you saw that we estimate around 300,000-400,000 if you do it really as one project to do tax determination. What I didn't include there is other special rules, like, for example, supply and install. That can be really complex again to do the tax determination. In Hungary and in Poland and in Italy, we have very specific domestic requirements. That's also not included. The tax code design, that's not included. Condition records, invoice layouts. If you have many invoices, I've seen record amounts of really creating the correct invoice layouts for VAT purposes, cleaning up and making sure that your master data is correct for the material and customer taxifications, and also the special regions like Brazil, India, US. That's all, of course, not included in those calculations. This is really a basic setup with some of the legislation rules, but the real special requirements come on top of that. So it can even be far more expensive than you thought it would be in the beginning. So that was for option number one, native SAP. Now we have another option, and we can, for example, build in a Vertex VAT add-in. We call that the Accelerator Plus with the tax decision tool determination. I've put an analogy on the screen where I just compare the different solutions with building a house, because very often people know how to build a house, and if I look at SAP native, then you get a robust foundation, because basically those condition records and those access sequences with a little bit of coding in the SAP system gives you already a foundation to build your VAT determination solution on. But next to that, you get a lot of bricks, and then you need to build. And we saw that on one of the first slides, all those green bubbles that we saw, you basically need to build that yourself in the SAP system. A second option is the accelerator with the TDT. So there you get a fully built house. So the exterior is completely done, but you don't have a bathroom, and you don't have a kitchen, and you don't have a lot of tiling, etc. That's not done. The interior you still need to do yourself. If I translate that a little bit into VAT terms, you're still missing the content, so you get everything pre-built into the system. You get a toolbox basically where you can easily implement your legislation into the SAP system. So that's with the TDT solution. You still need to do some work yourself. And with O Series, there you get basically a full house with a kitchen and a bathroom and everything installed. The only thing that you bring is your decoration and your furniture, and for the rest, everything is already ready built for the SAP system to do a correct tax determination. So what we now are going to talk about is the option number 2, the VAT add-on, and I think Anjo, you have some nice words around that as well.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. And in the meantime, I was looking at the Q&A and see if a few questions came up, and we did. So before we go into the tax decision tool, I think there are 2 questions that are more focused on what we just explained. So I'll read them up first, and I think they're both, I'm happy to answer them too, but I think they both maybe could start with you.
Yeah, but you can
first question. Okay, happy to do so. First question, SAP S/4HANA, if SAP S/4 can handle sales tax according to the reducing codes applicable in the US, or is an extra tax engine needed? I think the market expectation, and just not looking from a pure technical SAP point of view, because technically this is a difficult discussion, but pure looking at it from the perspective on, okay, how does the US market operate? That's where we see that 99% of all clients and all companies that operate in the US have a tax engine. And also when they are on SAP, there is that 1% of clients that when they operate in the US, that they don't use a tax engine and can actually perform certain configuration in SAP. So technically, it would be feasible if that's the question here, but 99% of the companies don't do that at all in the US market, because there are many other reasons why a tax engine is far better than that. So I hope that answers the question. You want to add something, Roger?
No, I think you explained that very good. Yeah, you see some companies that are quite simple and have really a tax-exempt business. They very often try to do it with native SAP, but there's so much maintenance to be done with a native SAP with the tax jurisdictions that the majority is choosing a tax engine. We always say in the US, it's not a question of that you need a tax engine. It's rather the question, which tax engine are we going to use in the US?
Yeah. And there was one more question that maybe I pressed the wrong button on the platform and I don't see it anymore.
Yeah. No,
the question was to just, I think I pressed the wrong button. But the question, I can answer that because I did read the question. Question was just that we want to clarify with your initial comments, Roger, about how does a tax engine work compared to, is it integrated with an e-invoicing solution or not? Or is it integrated with DRC or not? I think if you look at a tax engine or as a TDT solution, an SAP add-in that we're going to talk about in a second, it's focused on the tax calculation piece of the, let's call it the VAT process. and it's focused on calculating the right VAT amount, the right VAT rate, and the right, in Europe, the right VAT tax code. That information, it's all stored in SAP or in a different ERP. And what an e-invoicing solution or a SAP DRC solution does, it takes that information that was calculated by a tax engine and uses that for e-invoicing or calculation purposes. So both solutions, they don't contradict each other, and both solutions, they don't have to be directly integrated with each other, simply because e-invoicing solutions are meant to get data from SAP for e-invoicing purposes, and tax engines are supposed to provide data to SAP, so tax codes to SAP, tax amounts to SAP, to ensure that SAP has that information that can be used then for different purposes. Hope that's helpful. Then, yeah, let's move on to the tax decision tool. So and now we're going to go in a little bit more detail about the different type of options we shared. We have SAP native. Companies can also look at an SAP add-in and can look at a tax engine. Now, what is an SAP add-in? Part of it says it already. It's a solution that stays within your SAP environment. And what the Vertex solution does, it creates its own namespace in SAP. And within that namespace in SAP, this solution is installed and activated. And within that namespace, there is functionality that can be used, and we're going to go through it in a second. And within that namespace, with that functionality, the tax determination can take place. So it's not a tax engine in the sense that you have to have an integration to a third-party solution like Vertex O series. No, it's an SAP add-in that stays within your SAP environment and uses enhanced functionality to make a tax calculation.
So you want to talk about the visualization, Angelo?
Yes, of course. And one of the functionalities that an SAP add-in has is, and what's some of the functionalities that European multinationals appreciate very much, which is it can show you in a diagram form like you see right now on your screen. It can show you the different type of chain flow transactions that are taking place. Now, we're showing here on the screen a three-party transaction, an entity one, an entity two, and a customer. But this could be a four-party, 5, 6, 7-party transaction if that's how your business operates. And like we were just talking about, if we compare it to SAP native, where every transaction is looked at it separately, and every transaction needs to actually determine what the tax treatment is. But since being looked at it separately, sometimes the SAP native makes an incorrect calculation simply because it doesn't have all the right information required through the whole supply chain to know exactly what is taking place, what's the ship from, what's the ship to, what are the actual Incoterms that should be used. Not in every step of a booking in SAP that information is available or that information is correct. And I think that's the main message here, that with Vertex solution, you are able to connect all these type of transactions that are triangulation transactions into one diagram that you see here. And the one that we've taken as example is a three-party. And then actually connect them and use the right data fields to determine taxes.
Yeah, correctly. I see one question in the chat, and that is the question: is the TDT running in BTP or in S/4HANA? SAP hasn't created all the connection point yet to use a TDT also in BTP. So we are using BTP for Brazil. We co-innovated the whole solution with SAP to connect via iFlows in Brazil, and also in the US for the public cloud. We can use BTP already. But for the TDT solution, there's not enough availability yet from SAP. So we are working with SAP to make everything open for processing, so that we can also move our TDT to the BTP. So that is upcoming. That's on the agenda. It's on the roadmap. We are almost daily discussing this internally, but also with SAP to make sure that this happens as soon as possible, that we can move everything to TDT and then have a cleaner core. We already obey for 99% the clean core from SAP. But there's a little bit that you still need to implement in the SAP system. It's all in the namespace, it's all certified by SAP, so it's still a clean core approach. But we would like to go to the BTP in the end also to make it even cleaner. So I hope that answers that question. Looking at the TDT, so I always call it a VAT toolbox. So it doesn't have all the content. We have some content inbuilt already in the TDT, but we will later on also discuss this difference with a text engine. It's more or less a toolbox. You don't need to design anything yourself. You don't need to have an ABAP developer present that can help you design all the modifications in SAP to model all those complex flows. That's already all embedded in the TDT solution. You have that visualization that Angelo already explained. What we do different to native SAP is also that we don't use the condition record technique anymore, so the MWST goes away. We have our own decision lookup tables, also the OBCD for intercompany invoices and incoming electronic invoices. We don't use that anymore. We have our own lookup tables, which basically only need 20-30 lines of determination to do all the complex tax determination. So you don't need to have hundreds or thousands, or I've even seen companies with more than 1 million condition records. You don't need that anymore. That's all simplified with the decision lookup tables. What we also do for the taxability of the materials and services that you're buying and selling is that we don't need to use the material tax locations anymore. We can use, same like in a tax engine, we can use commodity codes or ASN codes, or maybe material groups, GL accounts, profit centers, whatever you have in the SAP system to identify what we are buying or selling, so that we can also determine if there's a standard rated, reduced rated, if it is a service or a goods. You can still use the material taxifications, but we have also a different solution there available that saves you a lot of maintenance in the SAP system. So the master data should be simpler in the TDD solution. And what we also see, and that is more in the area of Angelo. Angelo is a partner for us to implement TDT as well as the O series. And DMA has developed their own templates for speeding up the implementation. So you don't need to, like I said, you don't have all the content in the TDT, and that is delivered by DMA with templates to already pre-configure your system and then tweak it a little bit to the needs of the company. But that saves you also a lot of time in the implementations and make sure that you also can then also follow all the timelines of the S/4HANA implementation. Don't know if you want to add something to that, Angelo.
Yes, thank you, Roshane. Exactly, that's the point why my main message was to please, whenever you are making that comparison between native SAP and a different solution, and you're comparing it against TDT, to really look at the full implementation cost, because as DMA developed templates, which results into a quicker implementation, at the same time also a lower implementation cost. That's why that comparison is so important. And it becomes, even from our perspective, so important that if you start with SAP, especially if you start greenfield, I mean, if you are brownfield, you might still do a lift and shift and include certain enhancement and double check, and depending on your company's policy, maybe do a lot of changes if the company knows that the tax calculation is actually not correct. But if you are not in a brownfield situation but are actually implementing a greenfield, and if you then, your SAP team will then have to start configuring a native SAP from scratch, that takes a lot of time because SAP doesn't offer templates. You have to start from scratch to actually build up your customization. Whereas with a solution like TDT, we don't start from scratch. We start out of templates that are out of the box available. And those templates are out-of-box transactions that, based on our experience, we know apply for many companies. And then what we do is, of course, capture requirements, understand your business, and tweak the templates that we have already out of the box included to speed up the implementation timeline.
Yeah. Okay. So what are the advantages of our TDT solution? We see that because we can use any field in the SAP system for identifying what kind of flow we have, what kind of data is needed for tax determination. We see that this is more flexible than existing add-ins in the market. There's very often predefined what kind of fields you can use for tax determination. We say even if you define your own fields, you can just add them to the solution, and then the solution will just pick them up. It's quite flexible in what kind of data we can use. It's also not that expensive. I can't talk about numbers in today's webinar, but if you are interested in what the costs are for a license and also the implementation, you can ask Anju and myself after the webinar also for some indications there. But what I really wanted to point out is here that if you implement the TDT solution, because very often we see in Europe, tax engines are not that common yet. A lot of companies are adopting between native SAP or a third-party solution, and the third-party solution is then very often an add-in. What we offer is we give you the add-in, but if you afterwards see that your business is growing or you're going to other regions where you need to have a tax engine or any other reasons that you could have, we can basically switch the add-in to call the tax engine. So you don't need to change your functionality in the SAP system. You don't need to change the software in the SAP system. You use exactly the same software, that is the Accelerator Plus, but then we don't use that TDT piece of it to do the tax determination in the SAP system, but then we are going to call the tax engine to do the tax determination for you, including all the content. That is unique in the market. There's no other VAT add-in that can be upgraded to a tax engine. So I think that is also one of the real big advantages. If you are not really open yet to a tax engine, then think about this. And later on want to move to the tax engine, you just switch to the box, and then you will see that you can then automatically call the tax engine for your tax determination.
Thank you, Roger. And yeah, also, because I want to be respectful of everyone's time, this slide is focused on, I'll keep it a very bit short. This slide is focused on, we actually, like we just talked about a lot and compare a lot between native SAP and the TDT solution. Just wanted to highlight a few things here that in the green boxes, you can actually see the TDT functionality, and what's explained above is how you would normally treat it in SAP. So if I would take a few examples just to make it a little bit more concrete, one of the functionalities that we haven't talked about yet on this call is on the right top. That's transactional VAT controls, which means that, hey, it's also possible within SAP that with TDT, that if there are certain type of transactions that are included in a sales order, that from your company's tax policy, from your VAT policy perspective, you actually don't want to be generated, or you don't want to take place because it caused a VAT risk. It could result into an additional VAT registration in another country. It could result in charging the wrong VAT amount to your customer, or other issues. Then it is possible within the TDT solution to actually block or highlight, meaning warn, the sales order and say, yeah, this sales order cannot be processed, and with the explanation that the sales order should be discussed with the tax team. Not every company likes that because not every company wants to block orders, but that's a functionality that's available. It could also be possible that we warn the user of the order and ask the user to actually discuss this with the tax team, because the way an order is being processed goes against the tax policy. And in SAP, that could native SAP that could also be achieved, but then a significant ABAP coding is required. Whereas in a TDT solution, it's pretty much agreeing on what we want to achieve and use the out-of-the-box TDT functionality to set that up. And that's also how you could look at all these items here in green, that these are our out-of-the-box TDT functionality. And as another example, we just talked about a chain flow transactions that is very complex in SAP to set them up. You need user exits, you need ABAP coding to actually get to a good enough result. Within TDT, based on the dashboard that we just showed you, you could see that you could connect all these different type of transactions together. Based on that, determine the right data by a different type of leg of a supply chain and make then the correct tax calculation. And again, with TDT, we're not using ABAP coding, we're not using user exits. Instead, with an SAP add-on, we're using enhanced functionality. Functionality developed by Vertex in their solution that makes it far quicker and easier, and also easier for the company itself to maintain at a later stage, because you're making use of functionality instead of having to work with actually IT configurators to create user exits or ABAP codings, as an example. The rate classification on your top left, I think, Roger, you already went through that, so I don't go to that right now. The one that I also want to highlight is the SAP tax codes. Well, SAP, native SAP, for a different rate, a different tax code is pretty much set up to make sure that the correct calculation can take place. With a tax engine and with TDT, that's not how it works. You can actually just set up one tax code that applies different rates when there is a rate change within a country. So it's far more flexible to maintain, and you don't have to set up many tax codes like it's been done right now in native SAP.
Yeah. So
and I'm trying to keep this a bit shorter. Please add whatever you like.
Yeah, on the tax code, so we don't put a rate on the tax code itself anymore. That will just be we activate the line for the GL account, but we don't put a real rate on there. For the TDT, we just have a table that says in Germany from this date to this date, this is the applicable rate, and the system is intelligent enough to understand for which tax code that rate will be applied. So if you have a tax rate change, it takes you basically 1 minute to update the table. Of course, you have a transport to go to production, but it's just updating one row in a table with a tax engine that will be automatically delivered. So you don't even need to know that there's a tax rate change. That will all be covered by the tax engine. I see there is one question, can tax reporting date also be covered? Yes, we also can cover what kind of a date you need to use for the calculation and also the reporting for taxes. So that's correct. I see also one question for me and Anshul, if we could give an idea of the implementation cost and license cost. That person knows our email addresses, at least mine, I know for sure. So you can send us an email address for that, to our address. And then there's another one, how the TDT tool move back into SAP info about correct tax treatment to be used for printing on the invoices and reporting. Yes, so if you are using the TDT or O series, then we are going to update all the relevant VAT fields in the SAP system. So in the VBRK, we are updating the correct VAT registration of the customer. We are updating the correct tax departure country, tax destination country, and all other relevant data will be updated in the correct SAP tables. If you want to print invoices, of course, you need to have the correct VAT registration number. But what we also deliver is the correct exemption text. If you're not charging VAT, which tax should be printed on the invoice. You will see that already on the screen whenever you create a sales order or a billing document. You will already see what kind of a tax will be printed on the invoice, and then you can use that tax also on that invoice. So that should cover those two questions. And looking at the time, I think we need to move on to the next slides. We only have a few minutes left. A little bit about the cost. Like I said, I'm not going to name numbers, but I'm going to compare it with what other solutions we have. So if you would implement TDT, it's far less expensive compared to native SAP. We already explained how much native SAP would cost you, 300,000-400,000 if you are really good in the development. So TDT will be way less expensive than that. It's also less expensive compared to the tax engine, and we'll come back to that later. But there's a good reason why a tax engine is a little bit more expensive than TDT. And it's also less expensive, and we compare it with the market, with our competitors. We see that our pricing is in a better shape than with our competitors. So that is a little bit of the cost comparison. There you get a little bit of an indication what it would cost you to implement the TDT solution in your SAP system. Then we have a third option, and that is our tax engine. We already mentioned it a couple of times. That is our O series, we call that. That's our latest tax engine, and we connect that with the Accelerator Plus. Maybe, Anjo, you can a little bit talk about what the tax engine offers.
Yes, of course. Yes, and that's, I guess, one of the major differences between an SAP add-in like TDT and a tax engine like a Vertex O series is that a tax engine has actually content. A tax engine actually knows already what the VAT law is from a European perspective. So it knows when a domestic transaction takes place, when a distance sale takes place, when a VAT group takes place, and that's all content that actually be maintained in a tax engine. And it knows when an expense can be recovered or not. And with all that information, and then I'll move to the next slide. With all that information, a tax engine keeps that what we refer to as a tax content repository.
Yeah, but yeah, we have one problem, and you see that already on the screen. We have a tax engine that is coded in a certain language. But we are connecting the tax engine, and that's also different with TDT. TDT is really implemented in SAP, is only available for SAP systems. But the tax engine is used worldwide. Like I said in the beginning, we have 195 countries that we are covering, and we are connecting in all those countries multiple systems. You see, we connect with Oracle, we connect with SAP, Microsoft Dynamics, but also with SOAR, with billing apps, marketplaces, your own applications, any financial platform that you can think of, the tax engine will connect with and will then do a tax determination based on the information received from that other system. But there's no universal language. So we need to teach O series what kind of information is coming in and how to do the interpretation of the data so that it can really do a tax determination. And that is where our Accelerator Plus comes in. Anjo, you want to talk about this? Or?
Yeah, of course. And when it comes to the Accelerator Plus, let's look at it first from the right side. So on the right side, we just said a tax engine has a lot of content, and we want to make use of that content. But to make use of the content, we need to feed the tax engine the right information. Feeding the tax engine the right information is actually taking place in the Vertex Accelerator. That it analyzes the data and translate that data into a certain terminology, and let's call it a VAT terminology, that the tax engine can read well. But what an accelerator also does, and it goes back to the question that was being asked before, whether it can also read, for example, tax reporting data, and the accelerator is so flexible that you can actually pick any field you want in SAP, and you can put that into the accelerator and say, okay, I want to use the tax reporting country for a certain type of transaction because that matters within my company to meet my tax policy, to meet my VAT requirements. Then the accelerator is so flexible that you can actually make sure that that data is used as part of the data fields that are passed over to the Vertex tax engine, and with its content, then it can use the right data to make the right calculation. So please look at it. It has a lot of functionality, but part of it is to make sure that the right information is being sent to the tax engine, that the tax engine can give you the right content result.
One question coming in, can we use Vertex to save customer exemption certificates and notify users in case a certificate is close to expire? The short answer is yes. And especially looking at the time, we have 1 minute left. We keep it to that short answer, but if you have more questions about that, please contact us. I'm going to skip the next slide and then just only concentrate a little bit on the cost. So if you want to implement the O series with the Accelerator Plus, that's really depending on the scope. What kind of regions do you want to implement? Is it only Europe, or do you want to have Europe with North America, or do you also want to implement Brazil and so on? And also based on the revenue. So we have some revenue buckets to calculate the cost for O series. It's sometimes comparable with native SAP. I see even if you have a small revenue that is sometimes even cheaper than native SAP, but I don't want to put it on the slide. But often we also see it's slightly higher compared to native SAP. But the main reason for that is that we have all the content. So we have 150 people researching the content all over the globe to make sure that you are constantly up to date. So you don't need to do your own text research anymore. That's all embedded in the text engine, and that's why the costs are slightly higher sometimes in certain cases. We really reached the top of the hour, I see now. So I would like to give it back to Sabine for some closing words from my side and also from Andrew, I guess. It's thank you for today. I'm really happy that you joined us for today. Over to you, Sabine.
Yeah, many thanks to Angelo, many thanks to Roger for this insightful webinar. We have seen that there was a lot of interest because of the many questions you have asked, so many thanks for that. For your information, during the next days, you will receive an email from us with the replay of this webinar. So in case you may decide to listen to something again, or potentially you were able to dial in a little bit later, you will get the replay for that. So many thanks to everybody from you for joining this webinar. This concludes today's webinar, and I'm very happy to hope to hear from you again in the near future. In the meantime, many thanks to all of you, and have a lovely rest of the afternoon. Thank you, and bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.